Chicago Cubs baseball analyst Jim Deshayes kills me. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was stretched out on my sofa watching my beloved Cubs take on the Cincinnati Reds on Marquee Sports. The Cubs were up 7-2 in the fifth, which meant the game was in that sweet spot where you could actually breathe between pitches and enjoy the broadcast. Deshayes, who spent most of his playing career with the Houston Astros, was doing what he does best, hunting for what he calls a quality baby in the Wrigley Field bleachers during a pitching change. I don't know when it became a thing, but it was a thing now. Deshayes would zero in on some infant in the crowd, usually propped on a parent's shoulder with a tiny Cubs cap sliding off its head, and deliver his verdict with the same gravity he'd give to a pitcher's era. The man was a national treasure, as far as I was concerned. The Reds were swapping their starter for a reliever, the universal sign that a team has given up on dignity, when my wife of 6 years walked into the room. She carried a fresh beer for me in one hand and a glass of white wine for herself in the other, and I stopped caring about babies entirely. Vivian was wearing a pair of tight, short jean shorts and a halter top that left absolutely nothing to the imagination. No bra. The afternoon light from our bay window caught the gold in her blonde hair as she crossed the room, and I felt that same punch in the chest I'd felt the first time she smiled at me through the plexiglass of her teller window 8 years ago. Sorry, JD. A quality baby is nice, but a quality wife is on a different planet. Quality baby time, is it? She asked, glancing at the screen. Yeah, but still not as good as quality wife time, I said. She blushed. She always blushed when I said things like that, even after all these years, and sat down next to me on the sofa, pressing her body up against mine. I wasn't subtle about where my eyes went. Her chest first, because I'm a man and those were magnificent. Then the crotch of her shorts, because I'm also honest. You men are just so predictable, she giggled, giving her shoulders a little shake that made everything jiggle on purpose. We watched the Cubs tack on 2 more runs in comfortable silence. Vivian sipped her wine, and I nursed my beer, and life felt exactly the way it was supposed to feel when you're almost 30 and you've got a beautiful wife, a good job, and your team is winning. During a commercial break, Vivian shifted against me and set her wine glass on the side table. I knew that gesture. That was her "I've been thinking about something" gesture, and it usually ended with me agreeing to whatever she wanted because she had a smile that could negotiate world peace. "Q, why don't we go up to Chicago next weekend?" she said brightly. "Do some stuff to kick off quality baby making time. You could do a Cubs game, I could do some shopping. Or something." I caught the tone on the "or something." It was subtle, barely a half note off key, but I'd been listening to this woman's voice for 8 years and I knew every frequency. Something about the way she said it made me look at her sideways. "You wouldn't come to the game with me? I got cooties or something?" I asked, keeping it light. I felt her body tense up against mine. Just a flicker, like a ripple on still water. Then it was gone. "Well, I figured we'd each get some me time that weekend before we do the old pour the birth control pills in the trash ceremony and get on with starting our family," she said, turning those gorgeous blue eyes on me with that devastating smile. That smile had been owning me since the day we met. She knew it, I knew it, and there wasn't a damn thing I could do about it. She'd used it to get me to buy a bigger house. She'd used it to convince me that her 3rd pair of designer boots was a necessity. She'd used it to talk me into visiting her parents every other Sunday when I'd rather have been cleaning gutters in a thunderstorm. But right at that moment, something felt a half-degree off. Like reaching for a light switch in the dark and finding the wall a 1/4 inch further than you expected. Not wrong, exactly, just not quite right. I didn't push it. That's who I was. The guy who trusted his wife because she'd never given him a reason not to. 8 years, 6 of them married, and Vivian Langer Navarro had never so much as looked sideways at another man in my presence. Not once. "Yeah, we'll work on something. Let's do Chicago," I said, flat enough that it wasn't enthusiasm, but agreeable enough that it wasn't a fight. "Let's both take off Friday and head up Thursday evening." "I'll make some plans. Leave it to me," Vivian enthused, and she kissed me on the cheek and bounced back to the kitchen with her empty wine glass. I turned back to the game. Deshayes had found another quality baby, this one wearing a tiny foam finger, and was narrating its drool situation like a nature documentary. I should have listened to that half-degree. I should have pressed her on the or something. But I didn't because I was Quincy Oliver Navarro, the fourth-generation firstborn to carry that name, the guy everybody called Q because nobody under 70 should go by Quincy, and I trusted my wife with everything I had. That was about to become the most expensive mistake of my life. The shed aquarium was supposed to be the highlight of our Friday. We'd driven up from Indiana on Thursday evening, checked into a nice hotel downtown, and spent most of Friday being tourists. Vivian loved the aquarium, she always had. And I'll admit there's something about watching a beluga whale drift past a glass wall that makes your problems feel very small. We had lunch at a diner near the waterfront, split a plate of onion rings, and walked along the lake for a while. Normal married people stuff. Good married people stuff. Back at the hotel around 4 o'clock, I clicked on ESPN and started thinking about what to wear for the evening. I figured dinner somewhere nice, maybe a walk along Michigan Avenue, and then whatever Vivian had cooked up for the weekend's entertainment. We hadn't nailed down specifics, and I'd been content to let her handle the details the way I usually did. "So, dinner and what?" I asked from the bed, flipping between ESPN and a weather channel. She didn't answer right away. I looked up from the television. Vivian was standing near the window with her arms crossed, staring at something on the street below. In the late afternoon light, I could see the faintest tremor in her shoulders. A shiver, barely there, but there. The second physical tell in a week, and this time I didn't dismiss it. "Well," she started, and her voice had a careful, rehearsed quality that made the back of my neck prickle. "For you, it's the Cubs game tonight against the Cardinals. You're sitting right behind the dugout on the third base side. I figured you could eat and drink there." Third base side, behind the dugout. That was a hell of a ticket. That was the kind of seat you dreamed about while sitting in the nosebleeds with a $12 beer. Under different circumstances, I would have lost my mind with excitement. "For me," she continued, still not turning from the window, "it's dinner, followed by drinks and dancing at one of the clubs. I'm not sure when I'll be back. And I guess I don't expect to be around too much on Saturday either." She paused, drew a breath. "Then Sunday night when we get home, we can have our trash the pills ceremony and get started working on a family." The room went very quiet. Even the ESPN anchor seemed to lower his voice. "Wait, wait, wait." My voice came out louder than I intended. "Are you serious? You're telling me you're going out alone in Chicago for 2 nights and a day while I sit at a baseball game like a good little boy? What about us? What about our vows?" She finally turned from the window. The look on her face stopped me cold. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't embarrassment. It was patience. The kind of patience you'd show a child who doesn't understand why he can't have ice cream before dinner. "We've been talking about having kids at 30 since before we got married," she said. "Well, we're here now, but I've decided that since I'm the one doing most of the heavy lifting, I should get a bonus out of the deal." "A bonus," I repeated. The word tasted like battery acid. "You're not the one carrying a child for 9 months. Not the one sacrificing your body, not the one setting your career back years to stay home and raise. But I am the one who's going to be working to put food on the table and a roof over our heads. The one who'll miss every first word, every first step. Doesn't that count for anything?" She ignored that like I'd commented on the weather. "We've been together 8 years. Q, have I ever given you reason to doubt my love or my fidelity?" She didn't wait for my answer. "The answer is no, never, so I want something for me. A bonus. A weekend fling, not love, just lust for a day and a half. Then you and I throw those pills away and it's just you and me forever." I stared at her. My hands were shaking and I balled them into fists against my thighs so she wouldn't see. "I'm hearing a lot of I said, and my voice had dropped to something low and rough. "Remember what I told you once? There's no I in team. Well, there's no I in us either, but I guess if you do this, there won't be an us anymore. You're overreacting. And what about next time? When we want a second kid, same deal. Another bonus weekend. Do you see a lobotomy scar on my forehead?" Something shifted in her posture. The patience evaporated. What replaced it was harder, colder. "I wasn't asking for your permission, Q. I don't need your permission. I was informing you of what's going to happen. I'm a big girl. I decide who I share my body with." She paused, and when she spoke again, her tone was almost clinical. "This won't affect who we are once you get past your ego." "Not my ego, babe. I'd have to get past your incredible selfishness before I even got to my ego." I let the silence hang for 3 seconds. Then I added very quietly, "Maybe I should go find the same kind of fun as you." Her face changed so fast it was like watching a mask crack. The superior bitch attitude she'd been wearing for the last 5 minutes vanished. She looked like I'd slapped her. Her mouth opened and closed, and for a moment she was just a woman who'd realized her grenade had blown up in her own hand. She reached for her phone. Her fingers were shaking now, too. She texted me the Cubs ticket, a PDF, neat and organized, because Vivian Langer always had a plan. "You take the car," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "I'll catch an Uber." I gathered my keys and phone. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't look at her. I walked to the door and put my hand on the handle and stood there for maybe 2 seconds, waiting. I don't know what I was waiting for. An apology, a laugh, some indication that this was all a terrible joke. Nothing came. I opened the door and walked out. She probably assumed I was heading to the baseball game like an obedient soon-to-be cuckold. She assumed wrong. Pat Hughes and Ron Coomer were calling the Cubs-Cardinals game as I merged onto I-65 South, heading away from Chicago, away from my wife, away from the life I thought I had. The Cubs were up 3-1 in the third. Hughes had that velvet baritone working on a called strike three, and Coomer chuckled at something off mic. And for about 30 seconds I could pretend I was just a guy driving home from a normal weekend. Then a semi blasted its horn as I drifted toward the center line, and reality came slamming back. It's about a 3-hour drive from downtown Chicago to the suburb where my brother Bill lives, depending on traffic. I made it in 2 hours and 40 minutes because I barely noticed I was driving. My hands moved the wheel. My foot worked the pedals. The rest of me was somewhere else entirely, replaying every frame of the last 6 years like a detective looking for the evidence he missed. Where did I go wrong? I gave her everything. When she wanted the bigger house, I worked overtime for 6 months. When her father told me to keep his daughter in the style she was accustomed to, I nodded and made it happen. When she wanted the trip to Cancun, the designer clothes, the wine club membership, the remodeled kitchen, I said yes. Every time. Because that's what you did when you loved someone. You built the life they wanted, and you built it gladly. But somewhere along the way, Vivian had done the math and arrived at a conclusion that made my stomach turn. She decided that a man who gives you everything you want is a man who can't say no. She confused generosity with weakness. She mistook devotion for submission. I figured if I hit you with a little shock and awe, I'd overwhelm you and you'd have no choice but to go along with it. She hadn't said that yet. That particular gut punch was coming later, but that was the logic. I could feel it. She had planned this. The separate activities, the expensive ticket as a pacifier, the careful framing of it as a bonus she deserved. She had wargamed this conversation, and in every scenario she'd run in her head, I'd folded. She didn't know me at all. Or maybe she knew exactly who I was and bet against me anyway, thinking love would make me stupid. The Cubs won 6-3. I listened to the final out in Bill's driveway at 11:15, sitting in the dark with the engine idling, unable to make myself go inside because going inside meant telling someone, and telling someone meant it was real. I called Bill at midnight. "I need to crash at your place for a couple days," I said. "Don't tell anybody I'm here. Not Mom, not Dad, nobody. Especially not Vivian. My brother is 3 years younger than me and has never once in his life asked me a stupid question at a critical moment. He proved it again. Doors unlocked, guest beds made. Sharon put fresh towels in the bathroom yesterday," he said. "We'll talk when you're ready." I was inside and sitting at his kitchen table with a glass of water by 12:30. Bill appeared in the doorway in a t-shirt and boxers, took one look at my face, and sat down across from me without a word. I told him everything. It took maybe 10 minutes because the story was simple even if the pain wasn't. Wife wants to sleep with another man before we have kids, called it a bonus. Said she didn't need my permission. I left. Bill's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. His wife Sharon appeared behind him midway through, her robe cinched tight and her hair a mess, and she leaned against the doorframe and listened to the rest. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then Sharon spoke. "She actually used the word bonus?" Sharon asked. I nodded. "That stupid, stupid woman," Sharon said and walked back down the hall. Bill reached across the table and squeezed my shoulder once hard. Then he got up and poured us both 3 fingers of bourbon. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in their guest bed staring at the ceiling while the same questions chased each other in circles. Was there someone specific? Was this planned long before Chicago? Had I missed signs for months, for years? Was the whole baby-making timeline just a mechanism to get what she really wanted? And the one that hurt worst, did she really believe I'd go along with it? Did she really think so little of me? By the time gray light started leaking through the curtains, I'd moved past the questions. I didn't have answers, and I wasn't going to get them lying in bed in my brother's house. What I had was a decision. I wasn't going back. Saturday morning, I was on the phone with our bank before the hangover from Bill's bourbon had fully arrived. Canceled the first joint credit card at 9:07 a.m., the second at 9:11. Moved exactly half of our savings, not a penny more, not a penny less, into a new account in my name only. I was efficient and methodical, and my hands didn't shake once, because this wasn't emotion anymore. This was logistics. You deal with the fire first and cry about the ashes later. By 10 o'clock, the financial infrastructure of my marriage had been surgically dismantled, and I was sitting on Bill's back porch with a plate of bratwurst and a margarita the size of a small swimming pool. Sharon had made her famous potato salad, the one with the dill and the whole grain mustard that I'd been stealing the recipe for since Bill married her, and the three of us sat in lawn chairs under a cloudless Indiana sky and pretended the world wasn't burning. There is nothing better than the comfort of family when life goes to shit. I had no idea what Vivian was doing. I didn't know if she'd gone back to the hotel on Saturday and discovered I was gone, or if she was still out from Friday night and wouldn't know until Sunday. The only data I had was silence from my phone, and the silence was golden. That golden silence lasted until about 9 on Sunday morning. My phone buzzed against the patio table. I picked it up and read the text to Bill, who was already working on his second margarita of the day. "Where are you? We have to check out by 11. Bill and I looked at each other and laughed, the grim, dark laughter of men who are halfway drunk by mid-morning and all the way done with bullshit. 30 minutes later, another text. Same message, different words. Then the voicemails started coming, and I could track her emotional trajectory in real time like a barometer in a hurricane. 10 o'clock, annoyed, clipped, reminding me the checkout deadline was approaching. 10:15, angry, something about being abandoned and how this wasn't funny, and she expected me to answer my phone immediately. 10:30, a different kind of panic. She'd tried to extend the hotel stay, but her credit cards weren't working, both of them. And suddenly the anger was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost like fear. I held up my margarita glass and Bill refilled it without being asked. This is why I consider him a great sibling. The next voicemail around 11 was pleading. She didn't have a way home. We'd driven up together. She was stranded in a hotel lobby in Chicago with canceled credit cards and a husband who had apparently evaporated. "Not a prayer you'll reconcile with her?" Sharon asked from her chair, genuinely curious. "You two seem to have a pretty good marriage. I know you still love her." "I would have killed for her," I said, and I meant it. "And I know that feeling isn't going to go away fast." But the way she did it, it wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. She planned it. She strategized it. She bought me a ticket to a baseball game to keep me busy while she went, and I stopped. I didn't want to finish that sentence with bratwurst in my mouth. Some images don't pair well with grilled meats. "The best I can tell you," I said instead, "is that at best I'm number 2 on her list of people to love, behind herself." Bill's phone rang around 5. He looked at the caller ID, raised his eyebrows at me, giving me the option. I mouthed 2 words that rhymed with duck row, and Bill tossed the phone to Sharon, who was the only one still operating with a functional blood alcohol level. Sharon answered with the precision of a woman who'd been waiting for this call all day. "Hi, Vive. I'm answering Bill's phone because the drunk bastard doesn't have the balls to answer himself. Yes, we know what happened. No, we don't know where he is right now. How could you do that to the sweetest guy in the world, Vive?" I could hear Vivian's voice through the speaker, tiny, distant, rapid. Sharon listened with the kind of face a woman makes when she's being told something she doesn't believe. She rolled her eyes twice, scrunched up her face once, said twice and twice more. Finally, "Good luck." And she ended the call. "Bought you some time, you're welcome," she said, turning to me. "Did you know you two had a disagreement and you walked out on her without letting her explain? You really are a bastard, you know." You're not buying that. No, Q just telling you what she told me and what she's probably telling everyone else while she's looking for you. I closed my eyes. Even from 200 miles away, stranded with no car and no credit cards, Vivian was already controlling the narrative. She was already rewriting the story. We had a disagreement. He walked out. She just needed to explain. "Somebody pour me another Rita," I said. Bill did the honors, once again proving his value as a sibling. 8 margaritas in, I wasn't qualifying for anything that required higher brain function, and that was perfectly fine with me. Monday morning arrived with the kind of hangover that makes you question the basic concept of consciousness. My head felt like someone had inflated a balloon inside my skull and was slowly twisting it into a poodle shape. My mouth tasted like a margarita's revenge. I got into work at my usual time anyway because Quincy Navarro doesn't call in sick and doesn't feel sorry for himself, even when he probably should. I was, however, not dressed for the office. Jeans, a wrinkled polo shirt, and the kind of expression that makes people step aside in hallways. I walked straight into my boss's office and closed the door. "I'm either quitting or transferring to another office. Effective immediately," I said. My boss, a decent man named Carl who'd been running the Indiana branch of Bishop Enterprises for 12 years, leaned back in his chair and studied me like I was a piece of equipment that had suddenly started sparking. "Whoa, you don't give a guy a lot of chance to think, do you?" he said, half annoyed and half amused. "What's going on, Q?" So I told him all of it. The Chicago weekend, the bonus, the argument, the drive home, the margarita-soaked Sunday, and my half-baked plan to disappear so completely that it would take my wife, more accurately, her wealthy, well-connected attorney father, months to find me. Carl listened without interrupting. When I finished, he rubbed his jaw for a few seconds, then turned to his computer. "The Santa Fe office has a slot," he said, typing. "New Mexico, you'd be doing the same work, same level. I can have it set up today." I blinked. That fast? I've been trying to fill that position for 3 months. You're doing me a favor." He looked at me. "You said something about a name." "My middle name is Oliver. I need the employee records to show Oliver Navarro, not Quincy. And I need your word that nobody gives out information about me. Not to my wife, not to her father, not to anyone, within the bounds of the law." Carl was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded once. "Quincy Navarro no longer works at this office. Technically, by the time you get to Santa Fe, he won't work for Bishop Enterprises at all. Your transfer paperwork will go through a subsidiary. Different database, different everything. Oliver Navarro starts fresh." 30 minutes later, Oliver Navarro was on the road. I drove southwest with the windows down and the radio playing something I don't remember, watching Indiana flatten into Illinois and then Missouri, and then the rolling dry beauty of Oklahoma and the Texas Panhandle. I stopped twice for gas, and once for a burger at a diner where nobody knew my name or cared to learn it. The waitress called me "Hun" and refilled my coffee 3 times without being asked, and I thought about how the smallest kindnesses from strangers can feel enormous when your own world has collapsed. I got a new phone and a new number in Albuquerque. Gave the number out to exactly 4 people. Bill, Sharon, Carl, and one college friend who lived in Oregon and had no connection to anyone in Vivian's orbit. 2 people who did not get the number, my mother and my father. That one hurt. Bill had told me that Mom was already siding with Vivian, something about how marriages take work and I should have heard her out. As if "I'm going to sleep with another man this weekend, deal with it," was a negotiating position in a normal marriage. I didn't need her voice in my head, and I sure as hell didn't trust her not to hand my number to Vivian the moment she cracked. Dad was collateral damage. I loved my father deeply, but I knew my mother. She would wear him down eventually, she always did, and then he'd have to choose between keeping my secret and keeping his marriage peaceful, and I wouldn't put him in that position. It was cleaner to cut them both off and let Bill serve as the relay. Santa Fe surprised me. I expected desert and tourists, and I got both, but I also got something I didn't expect: space. Not just physical space, though there was plenty of that. The sky out here felt 3 times bigger than in Indiana, but psychological space. Nobody knew me. Nobody had opinions about my marriage or my wife's family or what I should have done differently. I was just Oliver, the new guy at the transportation office, who seemed nice enough but kept to himself. The company found me a one-bedroom apartment in a quiet complex near the office. It was small and plain and had the personality of a cardboard box, and I loved it immediately because it was mine and only mine. I unpacked my 2 suitcases and hung my clothes in a closet that smelled like pine-scented cleaner. I put my toiletries in a bathroom that nobody else would use. I sat on a bed that nobody else would sleep in and stared at a ceiling that had no memories attached to it. Quincy Navarro was gone. He had a wife who didn't respect him, a mother who didn't support him, and a life built on a foundation that turned out to be sand. Oliver Navarro had a small apartment, a new job, and absolutely nothing else. It was the loneliest I had ever been. It was also, I would come to realize, the first day of the life I was supposed to have. Santa Fe surprised me. I expected desert, tourists, and loneliness. I got all three, but the desert was bigger than I'd imagined, the tourists kept to the plaza, and the loneliness, well, the loneliness was a different species than what I'd prepared for. Indiana lonely is sitting in a quiet house wishing someone would call. New Mexico lonely is standing under a sky so enormous it makes you feel like a period at the end of a sentence nobody's reading. My one-bedroom apartment smelled like pine cleaner and carpet shampoo. The company had furnished it with the basics: a bed, a sofa that looked like it had survived a fraternity, a kitchen table for 2. I bought a coffee maker the first week and a bottle of Jack Daniels the second, and that was the full extent of my interior decorating. Work was fine. Better than fine, actually. The Santa Fe office was smaller than Indiana, which meant fewer politics and more actual work, and I threw myself into it the way a drowning man grabs a rope. My new coworkers knew me as Oliver, the quiet transfer from back east who showed up on time, did his job well, and politely declined every happy hour invitation for the first 3 months. I wasn't living. I was maintaining. Bill called every Sunday evening, same time, like clockwork. He'd give me the weather report from home, which I didn't care about, the Cubs' score, which I did, and then the update I both dreaded and needed. She still hasn't filed, Bill told me about 2 months in. Mom's been over to their house twice, says Vive cries every time your name comes up. Their house, I repeated. She moved back in with John and Barbara. Where else was she going to go? You took half the money and killed the credit cards. Dad Langer's footing the bill now. He's not happy about it. Good. John Langer had spent 20 years making sure his princess got everything she wanted. Now he could deal with the wreckage of that philosophy. She keeps asking me where you are, Bill continued. Calls about once a week. Sharon handles most of them. What's she telling people? Same story. You two had a disagreement. You overreacted. She just needs a chance to explain. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling of my apartment. A crack ran from the light fixture to the corner like a river on a map to nowhere. Bill, did she tell Sharon what the disagreement was about? The actual content? A pause. No, she keeps it vague. A misunderstanding about boundaries is the phrase Sharon heard last time. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. A misunderstanding about boundaries. That was one way to describe your wife informing you she intended to spend a weekend having sex with strangers as a reward for agreeing to have your children. Vivian Langer was smart. I'd always known that. She'd graduated near the top of her finance program. She could read a spreadsheet the way I read a box score, and she had her father's instinct for controlling a narrative. The woman I married was rewriting our history in real time, and I was 800 miles away with no voice in the conversation. But I also didn't care enough to fight it. Let her tell whatever story she wanted. The people who mattered, Bill, Sharon, my boss Carl, knew the truth. Everyone else could believe whatever made them comfortable. Months slid by. I learned the rhythms of Santa Fe. The way the light turned gold in late afternoon, the smell of roasting green chilies that seemed to hang over the entire city in September, the sound of church bells on Sunday mornings drifting through my open window. I ate alone, slept alone, watched baseball alone. Bill relayed a conversation he'd had with Vivian around the 1-year mark that stuck with me. She said, and I quote, "It was only 2 nights, Bill. It didn't mean anything," my brother told me. What did you say? I said, to you maybe, to him it meant everything. I closed my eyes and let that settle. My brother understood what Vivian never had. It wasn't the sex. It wasn't even the betrayal exactly. It was the disrespect. The assumption that I was a man who could be managed. handled, pacified with a baseball ticket while his wife went shopping for her bonus. About 18 months into my Santa Fe exile, I went on my first date. She was beautiful, part Pueblo, part Hispanic, with dark eyes and the kind of confident posture that comes from knowing exactly who you are. We went out several times. The physical part was good, and she was smart, and for a few weeks I felt something that resembled normal. But she was looking for someone who could commit, and I was still legally married to a woman in Indiana who, for reasons I couldn't fathom, refused to file for divorce. The beautiful woman from Santa Fe deserved better than a man carrying that kind of baggage, and I think we both knew it before the last dinner check arrived. I went back to my apartment and my routine and my crack in the ceiling, and I didn't try again for a long time. I was functional, I was employed, I was breathing, but I wasn't alive, not really, not yet. Let me tell you how I met Vivian because it matters for understanding what came next. I was 22, fresh out of college, cashing my first paycheck at a local bank because I'm the kind of old-school fool who likes to hold the paper in his hand. She was 22 herself, 2 weeks into her job as a teller, blonde and bright-eyed behind the plexiglass with a smile that could power a small city. "You know your employer can direct deposit electronically," she'd told me. "Save you these lines every Friday." "Yeah, but then I wouldn't have a reason to come see you, Vivian," I'd said, reading her name placard. She blushed. She bit her bottom lip. I chose her line for the next 2 Fridays, even when other tellers were free. The other teller caught on and nodded at me like we were co-conspirators in the world's slowest heist. I asked her out on week 3. She said yes before I finished the sentence. Vivian came from money. Her father, John Langer, was a well-known attorney with political connections and a soft spot the size of Texas for his youngest child and only daughter. What Vivian wanted, Vivian got, if Daddy's money or influence could make it happen. I learned this on the second dinner at her parents' house, when John looked me dead in the eyes over a glass of scotch that cost more than my weekly groceries. "Quincy, be good to my daughter and do the right thing by her, and her mother and I will treat you like family," he said. "But treat her poorly, or God forbid, put your hands on her, and you will have an enemy for life with a lot of friends." I believed every word. The man had a state judge officiate our wedding and a sitting United States senator, Uncle Sherm, Vivian called him, among the guests. The ceremony was the kind of affair that made my parents' heads spin. My father, who'd run a small business his whole life and gave me my first summer job, stood in a rented tuxedo looking like he'd accidentally walked into someone else's movie. Before the wedding, Vivian and I agreed, no children until 30. We'd build our careers, build our savings, build a foundation. Smart, practical. Exactly the kind of plan two 24-year-olds make when they think they've got the whole world figured out. Her 30th birthday was 2 weeks before Chicago. I tell you all this so you understand. When I lost Vivian, I didn't just lose a wife. I lost the future I'd been building for 8 years. Every plan, every assumption, every quiet evening imagining what our kids would look like, gone. Burned to ash by a woman who thought my love was a resource she could spend without consequences. Now, Santa Fe, 2 years after Chicago. I was sitting at the bar of a quiet pub I'd adopted as my regular spot, still in my jacket and tie from a day at the office that had tested every ounce of my patience. I was nursing a shot of Jack Daniel's Tennessee Honey and contemplating whether to order food or just drink my dinner when the front door swung open and a woman's voice cut through the room like a bell. "The one at the bar's mine, girls. You all find your own." I turned on my stool. 4 women filed in, all wearing jeans and work shirts, clearly coming off a shift at one of the local factories. The one heading my way had her work shirt unbuttoned to the middle of her chest, and what was visible suggested a solid C-cup situation that was doing just fine without any help from Victoria's Secret. She walked with the loose-limbed confidence of a woman who'd spent 8 hours on her feet and didn't give a damn what anyone thought about it. I wasn't subtle about watching her approach. She wasn't subtle about letting me. "What are we drinking tonight, Mr. Fancy Suit Guy?" she asked, dropping onto the stool next to mine with a grin that went all the way to her eyes. She had dark red hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, freckles scattered across her nose and cheeks, and bright blue eyes that looked like they'd seen some things and decided to keep laughing anyway. Irish, I guessed. Irish by way of New Mexico. Tennessee, honey, I said. That work for you? That works just fine. Her name was Evangeline, but everyone called her Angel, and I understood why within about 10 minutes. There was something about her that made you feel like the room had gotten warmer. Not hot, warm. Like someone had finally turned on a lamp in a room you'd been sitting in the dark. We talked. We danced. We drank probably more Tennessee honey than two responsible adults should on a weeknight. I found out she was out for a rare night of freedom because her 2-year-old daughter was with a babysitter. When she mentioned the child, her whole face changed, softer, fiercer all at once. Her father, I asked carefully. Angel looked at her hands for a moment. When she looked back up, there was embarrassment in her eyes, but also steel. I got too drunk one night, was by myself. I'm pretty sure I got roofied by 2 guys I was partying with. She said it matter-of-factly, like she'd made peace with the words a long time ago. I learned a lot of lessons that night. The biggest one is that me and my girls never leave a bar alone with a man we didn't come with. We leave together, or at the very least, in pairs. She paused, and then the steel in her eyes softened into something luminous. But my daughter is a gift from God. She is the most precious thing in my life. She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo of a toddler with her mother's red hair and blue eyes, grinning at the camera with 2 teeth and a fistful of Cheerios. "You got kids?" she asked. "I don't think it's ever going to be in the cards for me," I said, and then I told her my story, the whole thing, Chicago, the bonus, the drive, Santa Fe, all of it. Angel listened without interrupting. When I finished, she took a long sip of her whiskey and set the glass down. "Wow, that's terrible," she said. Then, without missing a beat, "But you're still married to her. You should get that taken care of." No drama, no gasping, no telling me she was sorry or that all women aren't like that. Just a practical woman hearing a problem and pointing at the obvious solution. I liked her immediately. Not the way I'd liked Vivian, not with that blinding, all-consuming certainty that this was the person I'd spend my life with. This was different, quieter, warmer. Like finding a fire after a long walk in the cold. "Yeah," I said, "I should. But you haven't. It would mean talking to her, and I'd rather chew glass." Angel laughed, a real laugh, full-bodied and loud enough to turn heads at nearby tables. I realized it was the first time I'd made a woman laugh in 2 years. "Fair enough," she said, "but you should still get that taken care of. A woman who do that to you doesn't deserve to keep you on a leash." She wrote her number on a napkin, an actual napkin with an actual pen. Old school like me. "Call me Mr. Fancy Suit Guy. I could use some adult company that doesn't involve discussing diaper brands." I called her 3 days later. That might have been the best decision I ever made. Angel and I went on our first proper date that Saturday, tacos at a place she knew in the rail yard district. Then a walk along the river path, while the sun turned the Sangre de Cristos pink and orange. She wore a sundress that showed off her freckled shoulders, and I wore jeans and a button-down because I'd forgotten how to dress for anything that wasn't work. "You own anything that doesn't look like you're heading to a board meeting," she teased. "I have a Cubs t-shirt. Wear it next time. You look like you're interviewing me for a loan." There was no pretense with Angel. No games, no performance, no carefully constructed version of herself designed to impress. She was exactly who she appeared to be, a 30-year-old single mother who worked hard, loved her kid, and had decided that honesty was less exhausting than the alternative. Our second date included Elinor. I'd suggested it, which surprised Angel. Most men, she told me later, avoided the kid topic like a landmine. But I figured if the mother came with a daughter, the daughter was part of the deal, and I might as well find out sooner rather than later if the kid and I could coexist. Elinor was 2.5, with her mother's red hair and blue eyes and a shy streak that manifested as burying her face in Angel's neck whenever I got too close. She peeked at me from behind Angel's shoulder like I was a large, potentially dangerous animal that might or might not have treats. I'd read somewhere, I don't remember where, but whoever wrote it was a damn genius, that the best way to connect with a small child is to get on the floor at their level. So when we got to Angel's apartment after lunch and Elinor started playing with blocks on the living room carpet, I got down on the floor across from her. She stared at me. I stared back. Then I picked up a red block and carefully placed it on top of a blue one. Elinor watched me with enormous blue eyes. Then she picked up a yellow block and set it next to mine. We built a tower together that fell over 4 times. Each time it collapsed, she giggled and clapped her hands and looked at me like I'd performed a magic trick. By the 4th tower, she'd scooted around the blocks and was sitting right next to me, her tiny shoulder touching my arm. I looked up at Angel, who was leaning against the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed and an expression on her face that I couldn't quite read. Her eyes were shining. "She doesn't do that with people she doesn't know," Angel said quietly. Over the next several weeks, Eleanor and I developed a routine. Whenever Angel and I were on the sofa watching television or talking, Eleanor would toddle over, grab one of my hands with both of hers, and tug until I got off the sofa and sat on the floor. Then she'd crawl into my lap like a puppy finding its favorite spot, curl up, and fall asleep. The first time it happened, I looked at Angel in helpless bewilderment. She was watching us with that same unreadable expression, but this time I could see what it was. She was watching a man be gentle with her daughter, and she was memorizing it. "She does know I'm not furniture, right?" I whispered over the sleeping child's head. "SHH, don't ruin it," Angel whispered back. I became Angel's backup for Eleanor's babysitter, filling out the written permission form so I could pick the child up if Angel had to work late. I bought a car seat for my Mustang and installed it permanently in the back, because nobody else ever rode there anyway. The guys at work noticed the car seat and gave me knowing looks. "It's not what you think," I told my coworker Davis. "Sure it isn't," he said, grinning. He wasn't entirely wrong. Angel and I never discussed exclusivity. She told me early on that she was seeing someone else occasionally, someone named Bobby, and I respected that. We weren't building a forever. We were two people who enjoyed each other's company and didn't feel the need to complicate it with labels. About 3 months in, Angel casually mentioned that she and Bobby had gone bikini shopping together a couple of days earlier. I was mid-sip on a beer. I set it down carefully. "Wait, what?" "We went to that new place on Cerrillo's Road. Bobby found this gorgeous red two-piece that—" "Hold on. Bobby went bikini shopping, B-O-B-B-I-E, not Bobby as in Robert." Angel blinked at me. "Well, yeah. Bobby's a woman, a lesbian." A pause. "Haven't I mentioned that before? I'm bisexual. I usually try to tell my dates early so I don't mislead anyone. That usually gets feelings hurt." She was looking at her hands now, then her feet, then the ceiling, anywhere but directly at me. Her voice had dropped barely above a whisper. "Is that a problem, Oliver?" I sat with it for a minute. I'd never dated a bisexual woman before, at least not knowingly. But when I pushed past the initial surprise and actually thought about it, the logic was simple. I'd never wanted to know what Angel and Bobby did together when I thought Bobby was a man. Why would it matter now that Bobby was a woman? "I don't suppose so," I said slowly, "unless she's really pretty. Women are generally more pleasing to look at than guys, and if she's really pretty, then I'm going to suffer badly by comparison. Should I be worried?" Angel's shoulders dropped about 3 inches as the tension left her body. "She is pretty," Angel admitted, "but I don't think you have to worry too much. You both literally bring different things to the table." She giggled, and the giggle turned into a laugh, and then I was laughing too, and Eleanor looked up from her blocks with an expression that clearly said adults are weird. "Who's Eleanor's favorite?" I asked in a childish voice. "You know you are," Angel said, and damn if that didn't feel like the best compliment I'd ever received. I didn't put 2 and 2 together when my phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon, and the caller ID showed a name I'd never seen before, Bobby Clarkson. Angel had never told me Bobby's last name. There was no reason she would have, and there was no reason Bobby Clarkson would ever be calling me except for one. My stomach did a slow, sickening flip as I answered. "Oliver." The voice on the other end was barely holding together. "This is Bobby, Angel's Bobby." "Yeah, what's wrong?" "There was an accident on her way home from work. A car ran a red light and—" her voice cracked apart like thin ice. "She's gone, Oliver. Angel's gone. The police found her phone and called me because I was in her call history, and I went to the hospital, but she was already— they said she was already—" She couldn't finish. I couldn't breathe. The room tilted. My desk, my computer, my coffee cup with the Cubs logo, everything slid sideways for a moment before I grabbed the edge of my chair and forced the world to hold still. "Eleanor," I said. "Where's Eleanor?" "Still at the babysitter's. Angel once told me you were cleared to pick her up. Can you?" "I'm leaving now." I don't remember driving to the babysitter's house. I remember the babysitter's face when she opened the door, confused, not yet informed, just wondering why I was there on a Tuesday, and I remember the look on Eleanor's face when she saw me and reached up with both arms. "Daddy, pick up," she said. My vision blurred. I scooped her onto my hip and held her tight and signed whatever the babysitter put in front of me and got back in the car. Eleanor played with the zipper on my jacket the whole drive to Angel's apartment, humming a song I didn't recognize, completely unaware that the person she loved most in the world wasn't coming home. Bobby was already there. She was sitting at the kitchen table with her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking silently. When she heard us come in, she looked up and I saw what grief does to a face. The swollen eyes, the blotched skin, the raw redness around her nose that comes from wiping it with anything you can find. She stood up and came to us and wrapped her arms around both me and Eleanor, and we stood there in Angel's kitchen, two strangers united by the woman they'd both loved, holding a child between them who didn't understand why the grown-ups were leaking from their eyes. We stayed like that for a long time, 5 minutes. Maybe more. Eleanor eventually squirmed and said, "Down," and the spell broke. I wiped my face with my sleeve. Bobby wiped hers with a dish towel. "We need to feed her," I said, because my brain had defaulted to the only practical thought it could manage. Bobby nodded and started opening cabinets. She found 2 cans of tuna and made sandwiches for us and mashed some in a small bowl for Eleanor. A juice box materialized from somewhere, a handful of Cheerios in a cup. We sat at the table and watched Eleanor eat, and between bouts of crying we tried to piece together what we knew about Angel's life. Only child, parents both dead. No aunts, no uncles, no cousins she'd ever mentioned. "There's nobody," Bobby said. "We're it." "What does that mean for Eleanor?" Bobby looked at the child, who was carefully placing Cheerios in a line on her tray. Her eyes filled again. "It means she's a ward of the state, foster care system, unless—" The word hung in the air between us. Unless. Eleanor looked up from her Cheerios and smiled at me with her mother's smile, and I felt something shift in my chest that would never shift back. "Unless we don't let that happen," I said. We sat at Angel's kitchen table until almost midnight, talking in circles while Eleanor slept in her crib in the next room. The tuna was gone. The juice boxes were gone. Bobby had found a bottle of cheap red wine in a cabinet above the fridge, and we were splitting it from coffee mugs because neither of us could locate actual wine glasses. "Here's my thinking," I said. "If the state doesn't know about her, they won't be trying to take her away and put her in foster care. She can just fall through the cracks. Stay with us." Bobby looked at me over the rim of her coffee mug. She was tall. I'd noticed that when she'd stood up to hug us, with blonde hair pulled back in a messy bun, blue eyes that were still red from hours of crying, and the kind of curvy build that would have been distracting under any other circumstances. Right now, she just looked exhausted and terrified and determined all at the same time. "What do you know about raising a kid?" she asked. "Honestly, nothing, but I was a kid once." "Perfect. That's not exactly the answer I was looking for." "Well, what's your answer? Because the alternative is handing that little girl in there to strangers who are going to put her in a system that chews kids up and spits them out. I've seen the statistics. I can't do that. Can you?" Bobby stared into her wine for a long time. When she looked up, her jaw was set. "No, I can't." We went back and forth for another hour trying to hammer logistics out of grief. The practical problems were enormous. I had a 1-bedroom apartment across town. Bobby had a small place of her own. Neither of us had ever been responsible for anything more demanding than a houseplant, and I'd killed 2 of those since moving to Santa Fe. "You should move in here," Bobby said finally. "Give up your place. Angel's apartment has 2 bedrooms, one for you and one for Eleanor. Her crib's already set up. Her toys are here, her clothes, her routine. Ripping her out of the only home she knows on top of losing her mother would be cruel." "What about you?" "I'll come by after work, every day if I can." We split everything, cooking, cleaning, nighttime duties, all of it. She paused. "I love that little girl. I've loved her since Angel first put her in my arms. I need to be part of her life." "Then we do it," I said. Bobby exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for the entire conversation. She looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time since I'd walked in carrying Eleanor hours ago. Then she stuck out her hand. "I just realized we've never actually been introduced," she said with the ghost of a smile. "I'm Bobby Clarkson." I looked at her outstretched hand. Then I walked past it and wrapped her in a hug, because handshakes are for business meetings, and this woman had just agreed to raise a child with a man she'd met 4 hours ago. She stiffened for a second, then her arms came around me and she pressed her forehead against my shoulder. "God, I'm going to miss her so much," she whispered. "Me too." I called my office the next morning and told my boss I needed a few personal days. Bobby and I made the decision to have Angel cremated. She had no family to consult, no will that we could find, and neither of us could bear the thought of a funeral that nobody would attend. The first 2 weeks were chaos. I moved into Angel's apartment with my 2 bags and a coffee maker, and discovered that toddler-proofing a home is basically admitting that everything you own is a potential weapon. Bobby showed up every evening after her shift, still in her work clothes, and we'd divide and conquer. One of us handled Elinor while the other cooked something that was usually edible and occasionally even good. We learned things. We learned that Elinor would only eat pasta if it was shaped like butterflies. We learned she needed her stuffed rabbit, whom she called Buh, to fall asleep. We learned that bath time was a full-contact sport and that neither of us should wear anything we valued within splash range. We also learned about each other. Bobby was sharp, quick-witted with a tongue that could cut glass when she wanted it to, but also unexpectedly tender in the quiet moments, singing softly to Elinor at bedtime, pressing her lips to the child's forehead with a gentleness that didn't match her tough exterior. She was smart, she was funny, and she had a streak of sass that reminded me so much of Angel it sometimes made my chest ache. She was also, I couldn't help noticing, very beautiful, tall and blonde and built in a way that turned heads, with eyes that managed to be both sharp and warm. Under different circumstances, very, very different circumstances, I might have been interested. But Bobby played for a different team, and I respected that completely. What we were building wasn't romance. It was something I didn't have a word for yet. About 3 months in, Bobby showed up one evening looking nervous. Elinor was already down for the night, and I was sitting on one end of the sofa, half watching a rerun. Bobby sat down on the cushion right next to me, facing me with her legs crossed underneath her. "Oliver," she said carefully, "what would you say to getting a bigger apartment and me moving in full-time?" I turned off the television. "It would be better for both our wallets," she continued, talking faster now, the way people do when they've rehearsed something and are terrified of losing momentum. "And we could share Elinor properly. I love that child and I want to be her mother, sort of, and you could be her father. Sort of, we don't need to be married for that, and since we're friends, not lovers, there's less chance of us splitting up like." "You don't have to finish that sentence." "Right, sorry." I looked at this woman who'd walked into my life on the worst night of either of our lives, who had shown up every single evening for 3 months without being asked, who loved a little girl enough to restructure her entire existence around her. "When can you move in?" I asked. Bobby's face broke into the first real, full, uncomplicated smile I'd ever seen from her. "I was hoping you'd say that," she said. "I already gave my landlord notice." I laughed. "What if I'd said no? Then I would have argued with you until you said yes. I'm very persistent, ask anyone." "I don't doubt that for a second." She reached over and squeezed my hand once hard, the way Bill had squeezed my shoulder in his kitchen a lifetime ago. "We're going to figure this out," she said. "The blonde leading the blind?" I offered. She frowned. "That's not the saying. No, it's the blind leading the blind, but your way would be funnier." She threw a pillow at my head, which I ducked, and we both laughed, really laughed, the kind that loosens something in your chest that you didn't know was tight. While in the next room, a little girl with red hair slept soundly, dreaming whatever 2-year-olds dream about, completely unaware that 2 imperfect strangers had just decided to become her parents. We had no idea what we were doing. We were going to be fine. Elinor had called me daddy once before. It was at the babysitter's house on the worst day of our lives when she reached up with her small arms and said, "Daddy, pick up." Because I was the man who came to get her, and she was 2.5 and the word was just a sound attached to a function. I carried her out and drove her home and held her while 2 strangers cried over the woman they'd both loved, and I never thought much about what she'd called me because everything else that night was so loud. This was different. It was a Tuesday afternoon, 6 months after Bobby moved in. I was picking Elinor up from daycare, signing her out at the front desk the way I did 3 times a week, while Bobby handled the other 2. The woman at the desk knew me by now and had the clipboard ready. Eleanor came running across the room, weaving between little bodies and abandoned toys, her red hair flying, and she slammed into my legs with the full-body collision that toddlers specialize in. "Daddy's here," she announced to nobody in particular and everybody at the same time. The daycare worker smiled. A mother next to me glanced over and nodded. And I stood there with a 3-year-old wrapped around my kneecaps, feeling something crack open in my chest that I didn't know had been sealed shut. This wasn't a sound attached to a function. This was a child who had looked at the other kids, listened to them talk about their daddies, and decided that the tall man who sat on the floor with her and read her books in funny voices and burned the scrambled eggs every Saturday morning was hers. She chose me, in daylight, on purpose. My heart about grew out of my chest. Bobby's moment came 3 weeks later on a Sunday morning while I was washing dishes in the kitchen. I could hear them in the living room, Bobby helping Eleanor with her shoes before we headed to the park. Eleanor was chattering about the ducks she wanted to feed, and Bobby was making the usual patient corrections to the left-right shoe situation. Then I heard it. "Thank you, Mommy." The water was still running. The dish I was holding was still in my hand. But every sound in the apartment except those 2 words went absolutely silent in my head. I heard Bobby make a small sound, not a word, more like the beginning of a word that got caught somewhere between her throat and her heart. Then the bathroom door opened and closed quickly, and I knew. I turned off the water and dried my hands. Eleanor was sitting on the living room floor in her correctly shoed feet, looking confused about where Bobby had gone. "Where Mommy go?" she asked me. "She'll be right back, sweetheart. She just had something in her eye." Bobby came out of the bathroom 2 minutes later. Her eyes were red, but she was smiling so wide it looked like her face might not be big enough to hold it. "Yeah, Mommy, it got to me too," I said quietly. She punched me. Hard, right on the arm. I probably deserved it for the smugness, but I smiled anyway and nodded at her because some things don't need more words than that. Over the months that followed, Bobby and I settled into something I didn't have a name for. We weren't married. We weren't dating. We weren't related by blood or law. But we were raising a child together, and that shared purpose created a bond that was, in its own strange way, stronger than any of those other labels. We figured things out as we went. Bobby handled the morning routine because she was a natural early riser, and I was, in her words, completely useless before coffee. I handled bedtime because Eleanor had decided that my reading voice was superior, a point I never let Bobby forget, and she never stopped disputing. We split cooking. I was better at breakfasts. She was better at everything else. We alternated grocery runs, doctor's appointments, and daycare pickups. We kept a shared calendar on the refrigerator that looked like a military operation briefing. At school events and birthday parties, we blended in with the other parents well enough. People assumed we were married, and we never volunteered that we weren't unless directly asked. When someone did ask, Bobby would say, "We're not married, but we're partners in raising Eleanor," and the way she said it left no room for follow-up questions. We deflected the childbirth stories. Every parents' gathering eventually turned into a competitive labor narrative. 36 hours with no epidural, and all that, and Bobby and I would exchange a glance, and suddenly one of us needed a refill on our drink. What held it all together, I think, was the absence of games. There was no sexual tension to navigate, no jealousy to manage, no competing romantic needs to balance. We were 2 people who genuinely liked each other, completely trusted each other, and loved the same little girl more than anything. Bonded by commitment. Strengthened by the fact that we had nothing to fight about except whose turn it was to clean the bathroom. That was always Bobby's turn, for the record. She just didn't know it yet. You could have knocked me over with a feather. It was a Saturday morning, about 4 years after Chicago, and I was sitting at the kitchen table stacking blocks with Eleanor while Bobby was in the living room reading. We'd moved into a bigger 2-bedroom apartment by then, in a complex with a playground and a pool, and life had found a rhythm that felt almost normal. Then Bobby's voice came from the living room, carefully neutral in a way that immediately told me something was off. "Oliver, someone's at the door for you." I picked up Elinor out of habit. She went where I went on Saturday mornings and walked into the living room. Vivian was standing in the doorway, my wife. The woman I was still technically married to, standing in the entrance of my apartment in Santa Fe, New Mexico, looking at me like she'd crossed a desert to get here, which, depending on her route, she more or less had. She'd lost weight. Her blue eyes looked bigger in a thinner face, and there were shadows under them that hadn't been there 4 years ago. She was dressed simply jeans, a white blouse, minimal makeup, which was so unlike the Vivian I remembered that it startled me almost as much as her presence. Then her gaze shifted to the red-haired child on my hip, and every remaining trace of composure left her body. Is she yours, Q? Vivian asked, her voice barely a whisper. I had to close my gaping mouth before I could answer. She's ours, actually, I said, pointing from Bobby to myself. Yours, she can't be, we're still married. Bobby and I aren't married, but Elinor is still our daughter. Vivian's legs seemed to lose their certainty. I pointed to the sofa and she sat down fast, like someone had cut her strings. Bobby took Elinor from me without a word and carried her to the back bedroom. I heard the door close softly. Bobby was good at knowing when to disappear. She was even better at knowing when to listen through walls. How did you find me? I asked, still standing. Vivian explained it in pieces, her hands knotted in her lap. The first year she'd waited, certain I'd come home once I'd cooled down. The next 2 years, John Langer had put investigators on it. My boss Carl had stonewalled them beautifully. Quincy Navarro doesn't work here anymore, he'd told them, and he wasn't lying, technically. It took a court order to access Bishop's employment records, and then her father remembered my middle name was Oliver. After that, I just had to find the courage to come, she said. Okay, you're here now, I said. Even if I was the biggest fool alive, Vive, I've got a family. I've got a beautiful woman I love and I trust completely. She respects me and I respect her. We've got a daughter we'll cherish long after she grows into a beautiful woman. My volume was climbing and I knew it, but I couldn't stop it. We are an us. I love being part of an us. Remember what I said to you in that hotel room. There's no I in team, there's no I in us. I get it now, Q, Vivian said quietly. She was looking past me toward the hallway where Bobby had taken Elinor. I figured if I hit you with a little shock and awe, I'd overwhelm you and you'd have no choice but to go along with it. I didn't think you'd give me up for a weekend of sex. Not love, just sex. Wasn't having children together and spending the rest of our lives together a big enough trade-off. You knew me better than anybody. You knew how I felt about fidelity, and you rubbed my face in it. I won't take that kind of disrespect from anyone. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. I had to give her credit for that. I'll file for divorce when I get home, she said. Abandonment. I don't need anything from you financially. She paused. Would I be out of line to ask you to forgive me for being a selfish woman? Something in her voice, the genuine crack of it, the way her shoulders curved inward, got through my armor just enough to make me human. I can try, Vive. That's the best I can do, maybe in time. She stood, gave me a half-smile that held more sadness than I'd ever seen on her face, and walked out of our apartment, and I hoped out of my life forever. I stood in the living room for a long moment after the door closed. Then Bobby appeared in the hallway. She'd sent Elinor to play in her room. She walked to the sofa and sat down, then patted the cushion next to her. I sat. Our knees were touching. Did you mean what you said to your wife? Bobby asked. Her voice was quiet and careful, like she was handling something fragile. About us being us? Completely, I said. I know you and I don't love each other like that, but I do love you, I trust you, I respect you, and I know you love us, you get it. I do, she said simply. She reached over and squeezed my hand. One squeeze, that was enough. Years have a way of sliding past when your days have a routine. Bobby and I moved into a 5-bedroom house when Elinor was about 7. We'd each saved aggressively, and the Santa Fe market at the time was surprisingly kind to a couple of single-income parents who were willing to do their own repairs. Each of us had what amounted to a master bedroom with our own bathroom, and Elinor had the biggest kids' room on the block, which she filled with books and soccer gear. The divorce from Vivian came through about 6 months after her visit. Clean, simple, no contest. I signed the papers at my kitchen table, put them in an envelope, and mailed them back. Bobby made spaghetti that night. We didn't celebrate exactly, but we didn't mourn either. It felt like closing a book I'd finished reading a long time ago. My dating life after the divorce was minimal. I went out occasionally, had my fun when the stars aligned, but I wasn't looking for the next Mrs. Navarro. Bobby dated more than I did and had a better social life, which she loved to remind me of. "You realize you're the boring one in this partnership," she told me one evening. "I realize I'm the one who's home with our daughter while you're out painting the town. You're welcome." We had rules. We communicated constantly about schedules. Eleanor came first in all planning, and no dates were brought home for anything other than a meal. That last rule was mine, and Bobby agreed to it without argument. The conversation we'd been dreading came when Eleanor was about 11. Bobby and I had been talking about it for almost a year, going back and forth on timing, wording, and who would say what. On the night we chose, I'm fairly certain there were two adults sweating harder than the child. We sat her down in the living room after dinner. Bobby had printed out several photos of Angel, the best ones we had, and laid them on the coffee table. "Sweetheart," I started, "there are some things about our family that we need to tell you, things we've been waiting until you were old enough to understand." We told her everything. We showed her the photos of the woman with the red hair and blue eyes and freckles who looked exactly like the face Eleanor saw in her own mirror every morning. We explained that Angel was her birth mother, that she was bisexual, that Bobby had been Angel's girlfriend, and that I had been Angel's boyfriend. We explained about the accident. We explained the choice Bobby and I made that night in Angel's kitchen over tuna sandwiches and cheap wine. "So we're not a family by blood," Bobby said, her voice steady even though her hands weren't. "We're a family by love." Eleanor looked at the photos for a long time. She touched one of them, Angel laughing at something off camera, with her fingertip, tracing the outline of her mother's face. She was quiet for several days after that. Not angry quiet or sad quiet, but processing quiet, which is different. You could see her working things through behind her eyes, fitting new information into the framework of her life. Then at dinner several days later, she put her fork down and looked at both of us. "You guys could have just let Child Services take me. Wouldn't that have been easier for both of you?" Bobby's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. "Doing the right thing isn't always the easy thing," I said. "I've never regretted my decision for a single minute. Except maybe when you threw up birthday cake all over my new suit when you were 6. Bobby let out a wet laugh and grabbed a tissue from the box on the counter. "I haven't regretted it either," she managed, wiping her nose. "Not for 1 second. Eleanor nodded slowly. Then she got up from the table and hugged Bobby first, then me, then went back to her dinner like we'd been discussing the weather. Kids are tougher than we give them credit for, especially ours. Being not married to a beautiful woman has its complications. Bobby and I had a lot of friends we'd developed as a couple over the years, and every now and then we'd go out for an evening of dinner and dancing. She loved to dance, and I was barely competent, but I worked hard to keep up. Our friends, most of whom knew we weren't actually a couple, commented regularly on how good we looked together. "If you two aren't sleeping together, you're both insane," our friend John said to me at the bar one night. "We're both insane," I confirmed. "But she's a better dancer than I am, so I'm the crazier one for keeping her around." Bobby danced with our friends occasionally, men and women, but she never accepted invitations from strangers. The men who approached her usually took the soft rejection with grace. Most of them. She'd just come back to our table after a dance with John when a guy maybe 10 years younger than her, early 30s, gym-built, too much cologne and too little awareness, decided that no wasn't a word he understood. "Come on, babe, I'm better than that guy you were just dancing with." "Give me a shot," he said, grabbing Bobby's wrist. Then he tried to yank her toward the dance floor. I was on my feet before I thought about it. At 41, I was still in decent shape at 6'2", 180, and I clamped down on the arm that was holding Bobby and twisted. The kid howled and released her wrist, which turned out to be his biggest mistake of the evening. Because the moment Bobby's wrist was free, she pivoted into him and drove her right knee upward with the kind of form that comes from 4 years of college soccer. The sound it made was not a sound any man ever wants to hear. He crumpled, but not before his face caught the edge of our table on the way down. By the time the bar manager and a bouncer reached us, the young man was curled on the floor with a bloody face and a whole new understanding of the word no. We gave our statements to the police. No charges against either of us. Walking to the car afterward, Bobby was calm as a lake in July. I appreciate the assist, she said. But Al Clarkson's daughters were taught self-defense before we started dating. Regardless of who we were dating, that boy made a really bad choice tonight. I like how your father thinks. Let's get him to teach Eleanor next time he and your mom visit. Already planned, she said. Eleanor had become a beautiful teenager, which was my worst nightmare come to life. She had Angel's red hair and blue eyes, she was athletic from soccer, and she had the kind of smile that made high school boys lose the ability to form complete sentences. I may have handled this poorly. I will find you, I told one particularly nervous young man who came to pick Eleanor up for a date. I don't care where you go, do we understand each other? The kid nodded so fast his head nearly came off his neck. Eleanor, standing behind me, looked like she wanted to crawl into the floor and die. You can't threaten high school kids with bodily harm for kissing your daughter, Bobby informed me sharply after Eleanor and the traumatized young man left. You're not meeting her dates anymore, Stephanie agreed from the kitchen. One of us will handle it from now on. Yes, Stephanie, I'm getting ahead of myself, but not by much. She'd been in our lives for about a year at this point and had already figured out that I was, on this particular subject, completely unreasonable. They made me apologize, to my daughter and to the boy. Would you be this nuts if I chose to date women, Dad? Eleanor asked me later, genuinely curious. Probably not, I admitted. But then you'd have to deal with Mom and Stephanie. That wouldn't be any easier for your date. I watched several emotions cross her face as she considered this. Then she broke into a reluctant grin. Darn, much as I hate to admit it, that might actually be worse. I chuckled and felt better when she walked away. I knew Bobby was dating someone special when she kicked me out of the kitchen entirely. Go watch your baseball or whatever. I need this kitchen, she ordered, waving a wooden spoon at me like a weapon. Bobby's go-to dish for people she wanted to impress was veal parmigiana with spaghetti, and she only made it when the stakes were high. She'd cooked it for my birthday once and for Eleanor's kindergarten teacher when we needed a conference to go well. This was a different kind of high stakes. Stephanie Ellis arrived at 6:30. I opened the front door and I'm fairly certain my brain stopped working for about 2 seconds. Big brown eyes, porcelain skin, dark brown curly hair that fell to her shoulders. The body of someone who'd been photoshopped by God. She was wearing a simple black dress that on most women would have been just a dress, and on her was a reason to question your life choices. You must be Oliver, she said warmly. Bobby talks about you constantly. She does. That seems unwise, I said, shaking her hand. Eleanor, who was 15 and already sharper than both her parents combined, appeared at my elbow, assessed the situation in about 3 seconds flat, and leaned close to my ear. Dad, you need to let Mom find you a woman. She's really good at picking them. Yeah, I breathed. You're not wrong about that. Stephanie fit into our family dinner like she'd been coming over for years. She was warm and thoughtful and asked Eleanor questions about school and soccer that were actually good questions, not the condescending adult talking to a teenager variety. Bobby spent the entire evening looking at Stephanie the way I used to look at, well, the way I used to look at someone a long time ago. It was beautiful to watch. And if I felt a small twinge of envy, well, that's what happens when you remember what it feels like to be that gone for somebody. 3 weeks later, I got a phone call from Stephanie asking if we could meet for lunch. She asked me not to tell Bobby. I agreed hesitantly. The restaurant was near my office, and when Stephanie walked in, I could see the envious looks from several men in the room. I chuckled inwardly. If they only knew, she didn't waste time. I need to understand your relationship with Bobby, she said, stirring her drink without making eye contact. Because I'm falling for her and I need to know if she's already in a relationship that I can't compete with. I smiled. Stephanie looked worried. Women as pretty as Bobby don't date guys like me, Steph, even if she wasn't a lesbian. But you're right, we do have a loving relationship. It just takes some explaining. I explained for the next hour. All of it. Angel, the accident, the kitchen table decision, the daycare moments, the routines, the rules. I explained how two people who weren't attracted to each other, weren't married, and didn't share a last name had somehow built one of the strongest partnerships I'd ever seen. We both got back to work late. But before we left, Stephanie finished her rye whiskey and set down the glass with the certainty of a woman who'd made a decision. Okay, I'm in, she said. I'd love to be a part of this family. 6 months later, Bobby and Stephanie were getting married. I gave Bobby away at the altar since her father had passed several years earlier. Walking her down the aisle, her arm linked through mine, I whispered, "You deserve this." "Shut up or I'll cry and ruin my makeup," she whispered back. 15-year-old Elinor stood among the bridesmaids in a deep blue dress, grinning so hard it must have hurt. When the officiant pronounced them married and Bobby and Stephanie kissed, our daughter cheered loud enough to be heard in the parking lot. At the reception, Elinor found me at the bar. "2 moms, 1 dad, and 4 different last names," she said, shaking her head. "We're definitely going to need name tags at Thanksgiving." "We'll figure it out," I said. "We always do," she agreed, clinking her ginger ale against my bourbon. "There are no words in the English language more terrifying to a man than we need to talk." I was sitting on my end of the sofa watching a baseball game when Bobby said them. She was standing in the doorway with an expression that was halfway between nervous and nauseated, which was not a combination I'd ever seen on her face before. "Can we go to the formal living room?" she asked. The formal living room. The room we only used for guests and serious conversations. The room where I'd told Elinor the truth about her birth mother. The room where good news never lived. I walked in to find Stephanie already seated on the sofa with 2 glasses of white wine. She handed me a shot glass of what appeared to be Angel's Envy rye, the good stuff, which confirmed that whatever was coming was significant enough to require expensive whiskey. Bobby sat down next to Stephanie. I settled into the wingback chair across from them and took a sip. "I don't know what I've done wrong, but I completely and sincerely apologize, and I promise I won't do it again. Ever," I said. The 2 women looked at each other in confusion. Then Bobby connected the dots and laughed. "Relax, Oliver, it's nothing like that, but we can hang on to that apology for the next time you mess up." She took a breath, then another. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "We need a favor," she managed. She looked at me. She swallowed. She looked at Stephanie. Nothing came out. Stephanie, apparently deciding that watching Bobby struggle was more painful than just saying it, leaned forward. "Would it be possible? Could we borrow a cup of sperm, Oliver?" The formal living room went very quiet. I stared at Stephanie. I looked at Bobby. I looked back at Stephanie. My brain was doing something that felt like a car trying to start on a cold morning, cranking, not quite catching. "We want to have a baby," Bobby said, the words tumbling out now that Stephanie had opened the gate. "Through in vitro, and we want you to be the donor. Would you do that for us?" Crank, catch. The grin started small, then it spread across my face like sunrise. "Oh, hell yes," I said, and the room erupted. Bobby and Stephanie were out of their seats and jumping up and down on either side of me like children on Christmas morning. Bobby was laughing and crying simultaneously. Stephanie was hugging me and then hugging Bobby and then hugging me again. When we finally settled down and caught our breath, I asked the question that had been forming behind the grin. "Why me?" They looked at each other with enormous smiles. "You're smart, personable, respectful, handsome, and fit," Bobby said. "You're a great father and a good man. It would be amazing if our child could inherit some of those traits." I've only cried a handful of times as an adult. That was one of them. I didn't sniffle or tear up. I bawled, full on, face in hands, shoulder shaking, bawling, while 2 women rubbed my back and waited for me to pull myself together. "You know," I said between gasps, "if you 2 want, I could sell you my half of the house and—" "No," Bobby cut me off. "We don't want you to move. We want you here. We were hoping you'd help us raise this baby the way you and I raised Elinor. I think we did a pretty good job, don't you?" Stephanie leaned forward. "Studies show that children do better with both a mother and a father in the home. Imagine how well this child could do with 2 mothers and a father, and a big sister before Elinor heads off to college." "I love you guys," I said. "You know that?" we told Elinor at dinner that night. She jumped out of her chair and nearly knocked Bobby's plate off the table with her hug. "I get to be a big sister. How cool is that?" 2 months later, the 3 of us waited in the kitchen while Stephanie disappeared into the master bathroom with a pregnancy test. The minutes felt like hours. I held Bobby's hand. Elinor held mine. Stephanie came out with tears running down her cheeks and the biggest smile I'd ever seen on a human face. A little more than 13 years ago, I was a broken man in a 1-bedroom apartment staring at a crack in the ceiling, certain that children would never be part of my story. Now I was months away from having a second child, surrounded by people who loved me and whom I loved fiercely. Family comes in all shapes and configurations. Ours just happened to look like nothing anyone had ever seen before, and it was perfect. Roman Alexander Ellis was 11 months old and already working the room. I carried him into the high school gymnasium on graduation day, trailing behind Bobby and Stephanie, and we couldn't make it 10 feet without some woman stopping us to coo at the baby. Roman had Stephanie's dark brown eyes and a head full of curly hair that was lighter than hers but darker than Bobby's, and he had figured out at an obscenely young age that smiling at strangers produced positive results. Every time someone leaned in to admire him, he'd flash a gummy grin and wave a fat hand, and the woman would melt, and I'd stand there holding him thinking, "Yeah, kid. You're going to be trouble." We found our seats near the front. The gymnasium smelled like floor polish and nervous sweat and someone's overly aggressive perfume. Folding chairs had been arranged in rows across the basketball court, and a makeshift stage with a podium and too many flower arrangements occupied the far end. The place was packed. Every parent had a camera. Every grandparent had a tissue. I settled Roman on my lap and opened the program. The graduates were listed alphabetically, and I scanned until I found her name, Elinor Bourne, salutatorian. Below the listing of graduates was the ceremony order, and that's where I saw the title of her speech. "There's no I in team." I stared at those words for a long time. Then I closed the program and pressed it against my chest and took a breath that went deeper than my lungs. Bobby noticed. She put her hand on my forearm. "You okay?" "Yeah, read the speech title." She opened her program. I watched her eyes find it. She closed the program slowly and looked straight ahead at the empty stage. "That girl," she said quietly. Elinor was the second speaker of the ceremony. She walked to the podium in her cap and gown, adjusted the microphone, and looked out at the crowd. Her red hair caught the gymnasium lights. Her blue eyes found us in the third row, and she held our gaze for just a moment before she began. She talked about teams. Not sports teams, although she used soccer as an example since she'd played varsity for 3 years. She talked about how a team is a group of people who each bring something different, and how the whole point is that nobody has to be good at everything because someone else covers what you can't. Then she talked about her family. She didn't use names. She said my father and my mother, and my stepmother and my brother. She said her family had 4 different last names and 3 different households before they became one. She said the people who raised her weren't connected by blood or by law, but by a decision they made on the worst night of their lives to do the hard thing instead of the easy thing. She said, "I stand here today because 4 imperfect people decided to row in the same direction. They didn't agree on everything. They still don't. My dad thinks he can cook breakfast, and my mom has a different opinion about that." The gymnasium laughed. Bobby muttered something I won't repeat. "But they agreed on the thing that mattered," Elinor continued. "They agreed on me. And later they agreed on my brother. And every single day they showed me that a team doesn't require perfection. It requires showing up." I'm pretty sure I grew another inch that afternoon. There weren't many dry eyes in the house, and I contributed my share to the moisture level. Bobby was gone, completely dabbing her face with the tissue she'd had ready since we sat down. Stephanie had her arm around Bobby's shoulders, and her own cheeks were wet. Roman, oblivious to all of it, was trying to eat the program. After the ceremony, after the photos and the hugs and the congratulations from teachers who told us what we already knew, that Elinor was special, we went to dinner as a family. Roman sat in a high chair and threw breadsticks at the waiter, and nobody cared. 5 days later, we loaded up 2 cars and drove Elinor to Arizona State University for her freshman year. We left Santa Fe early and spent the drive across the desert and into Arizona doing all the touristy things Elinor wanted. The Petrified Forest, a roadside diner that served green chili cheeseburgers the size of Roman's head, a sunset stop at an overlook where the 4 of us stood in a line and watched the sky turn colors that didn't seem real. Elinor was quiet for most of that stop. She leaned against me, and I put my arm around her shoulders, and we watched the desert go orange and purple without saying anything, because sometimes the best conversations don't involve words. Moving day was chaos. We hauled boxes up 3 flights of stairs because the elevator was broken. Bobby assembled a bookshelf with nothing but a Swiss Army knife and profanity. Stephanie organized the closet. I dealt with the roommate's father, a large man from Phoenix who seemed suspicious of our family configuration until I explained it, at which point he seemed even more suspicious, but at least stopped asking questions. Roman crawled around the dorm room floor, picking up things he shouldn't and putting them in his mouth. Standard operating procedure. When it was time to go, we lined up in front of Elinor for final hugs. Stephanie first, then Bobby. That one took a while, then me. I noticed that the order wasn't random. She'd saved me for last on purpose. "Promise me, Dad," she said quietly while Bobby and Stephanie headed back to the car with Roman. "Promise me you'll do a better job of looking for a good woman." I know it wasn't a priority while I was home, but now that I'm gone, Mom has a good woman. You need one too. "I'll try, baby, but I can't promise. Good women like Stephanie don't grow on trees, you know." She pulled back and looked me in the eyes. She had Angel's face and Bobby's stubbornness and something that was entirely her own, a kind of calm certainty that made her seem older than 18. "Just try," she said. "I will." She kissed me on the cheek and walked into her dormitory without looking back, the same way I'd once walked out of a hotel room in Chicago. The difference was that she was walking towards something, and I'd been running from something, and I hoped with everything I had that her version would work out better than mine. I drove the lead car on the way home. Bobby rode with me. Stephanie and Roman were in the car behind us. Somewhere in the Arizona desert, Bobby fell asleep in the passenger seat, and I drove through the darkening landscape alone with my thoughts and the faint sound of a Cubs game on the satellite radio. The apartment was going to feel very different without her. 6 years went by in what felt like 6 months. Elinor graduated from Arizona State with honors. She called us from the ceremony, all 4 phones buzzing simultaneously, and we screamed congratulations through speaker so loud that Roman covered his ears, and the dogs started barking. She'd found her footing in Arizona, a degree in communications, an internship that turned into a job, and a young man named Jack Lassiter whom she described to me on the phone as the male version of you, Dad, except he can actually cook. I wasn't sure how I felt about that, but Bobby and Stephanie had already met him on a visit and given their approval, which carried more weight with Elinor than mine did on romantic matters. She was probably right about that. 2 years after graduation, Elinor called to tell me she was engaged. I said congratulations and told her I loved her and hung up the phone and sat in my kitchen for 20 minutes staring at the wall because my little girl was getting married, and I was suddenly, irrationally furious at time for moving so fast. Jack Lassiter proved to be a genuinely nice young man. Good family, steady job, kind eyes, firm handshake. He was the sort of person you want to dislike on principle when he's marrying your daughter, but he made it impossible by being unfailingly respectful and clearly, obviously, head over heels in love with Elinor, which didn't stop me from having a private conversation with him the day before the wedding. I found him alone in the groomsmen's room, adjusting his tie in the mirror. I walked in, closed the door, and put him in a single-arm chokehold before he could finish saying, "Hey, Q, I will never interfere in your marriage," I said calmly while he made gurgling sounds. "But if you ever lay a hand on my daughter, if you ever disrespect her, if you ever make her cry for a reason that isn't happy tears, I will find you, and this little hug will feel like a massage compared to what comes next. Do we understand each other?" He managed. "Good man." I released him and straightened his tie, which had gone sideways during our discussion. "You look great." "She's going to love that suit." He rubbed his neck and looked at me with watering eyes and something that might have been respect or might have been terror. "Understood, sir," he croaked. "Sue me. She's my little girl. I was in my mid-50s, but I still hit the gym 3 days a week, and I wanted my future son-in-law to understand that actions have consequences." The ceremony was beautiful. Walking Elinor down the aisle was the kind of experience that doesn't translate into words no matter how many you know. She wore white and she looked like her mother, both of her mothers, somehow, and when she squeezed my arm at the end of the aisle and whispered, "Thank you for everything, Dad," I nearly lost it in front of 300 people. The reception was a different kind of beautiful. Loud, chaotic, joyful. I made the rounds at every table, shook every hand, kissed every cheek, ate food I couldn't identify, and drank bourbon that was definitely too expensive for the quantity I consumed. 7-year-old Roman, who had been given the critical job of ring bearer, had already removed his suit jacket, loosened his tie, and was running laps around the dance floor with 2 of Jack's younger cousins. I was standing with a group of friends, pleasantly buzzed and genuinely happy, when a small hand grabbed my right wrist and pulled. "You have a minimum height limit on your dance partners, stud." I looked down. The woman attached to the hand was a good 8 inches shorter than me, with shoulder-length silver hair that had streaks of purple running down both sides. She had sharp blue eyes, a grin that took up half her face, and the compact, muscular build of someone who'd spent serious time in a gymnasium, the exercise kind, not the graduation kind. "I'm Aunt Deb," she announced, pulling me toward the dance floor. "I'm Marcia's best friend. I changed your new son-in-law's diapers back in the day. My nephew has nothing but good things to say about you, and he also warned me about your killer chokehold." "Word travels fast," I said as she found us a spot on the dance floor. "Word should travel fast when it's entertaining." The first 2 songs were fast, and this woman could move. She danced with the kind of fearless, full-body commitment that most people reserve for activities performed behind closed doors. Her legs were powerful, gymnast's legs, I decided, and she had a way of throwing her head back when she laughed that made her purple streaks fly. The third song was slow. I tried to maintain a respectable distance. Deb had other plans. She stepped into me and pressed herself close enough that I could smell her perfume, something sharp and clean, like cedar, and feel the heat of her skin through my dress shirt. "I can tell somebody hits the gym on a regular basis," she said. "You're not exactly made of marshmallows yourself," I replied. She laughed that throw-her-head-back laugh and pulled me closer. After the song, I led her back to my table by the hand. She came willingly, which was good because she was about to meet the 2 people whose opinion of her mattered more than mine. "Deb, this is Bobby and Stephanie. Bobby and Stephanie, this is Deb. She's Jack's mom's best friend. She knew Jack as a baby. She seems—" I paused, looking for the right word. "Relentless," I finished. "Accurate," Deb confirmed, sitting down and shaking both women's hands. Bobby and Stephanie gave her exactly 30 seconds to get comfortable. Then the interrogation began. I'd seen this before. When Stephanie first entered our orbit, she'd gotten the same treatment. Bobby and Stephanie were protective of me the way I was protective of Eleanor, fiercely, unreasonably, and without apology. Any woman who wanted access to my heart had to go through them first, and they were thorough. "I'm going to the bar to get you another drink," I told Deb. "You're going to need it." At the bar, Jack's mother, Marcia, appeared beside me, watching Deb with the 3 of them. "She's a real pistol," Marcia said. "Let's see how she handles this." "Give me the quick version," I said. Marcia filled me in. Deb was 55, a year younger than me. She'd been married for 15 years before catching her husband cheating on her about 10 years ago. "What happened?" I asked. "She kicked him in the balls and then kicked him out," Marcia said cheerfully. "In that order." "I think I'm in love," I said, only half joking. I gave it 5 minutes before heading back to the table. When I got there, all 3 women were laughing so hard that Bobby had tears on her cheeks and Stephanie was holding her stomach. Deb looked up at me with those sharp blue eyes and that massive grin, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a very, very long time. Not since a blonde bank teller bit her lip behind a plexiglass window when I was 22 years old. Lightning. What did I miss? I asked, setting down Deb's drink. "Nothing you need to worry about," Bobby said, wiping her eyes. "Sit down and be quiet." I sat down and I was not quiet, and the 4 of us talked until the reception ended, and when Deb wrote her number on the back of a cocktail napkin, a napkin with a pen, I felt the ghost of Angel's smile somewhere. Old school, like me. The first spring Deb lived with us, I had to till her a garden. I say had to because Deb doesn't ask for things the way normal people do. Normal people say, "Would you mind?" or "when you get a chance." Deb says the garden needs to be 12 by 8, and I need it by Saturday. And then she hands you a diagram she drew on the back of a grocery receipt and walks away before you can negotiate. We, and by we, I mean me, spent hours planting salad vegetables while Deb supervised from a lawn chair with a glass of lemonade and a very helpful running commentary about my technique. "You're putting the tomatoes too close together. They're fine. They're not fine, they need 18 inches. They have 18 inches. That's 14 inches. How can you tell from 6 feet away? I have excellent spatial awareness and you have denial. Move the tomato." I moved the tomato. I told her she was part cat because everyone knows cats are nature's best supervisors. She threw a cherry tomato at my head, which I caught because I have excellent spatial awareness too, and my reflexes are better than my gardening. Deb was everything I could have wanted in a wife and didn't know I needed. Where I was laid back, she was electric. Where I conserved energy, she generated it. She couldn't sit still. She rearranged furniture the way other people changed channels, impulsively, frequently, and without consulting anyone. But underneath the energy and the boldness and the purple hair, she was also the kindest woman I'd ever been close to. She remembered birthdays without reminders. She left notes in Roman's lunchbox. She learned Bobby's coffee order and Stephanie's wine preference and had both ready before anyone asked. She figured out within her first week in our house that the way to Bobby's heart was through Arsenal football, and the way to Stephanie's was through cooking together, and the way to mine was simply to be honest with me, because I'd had enough of the other thing to last a lifetime. Bobby and Stephanie fell for her almost as fast as I did. But that didn't stop them from delivering their traditional warning before the wedding. Deb told me about it the next day, looking genuinely shaken. Your best friends just informed me, and I believe these are direct quotes, that they would pound me to dust if I broke your heart, both of them together, while smiling. I'm pretty sure they weren't kidding, babe, I said. I know they weren't kidding, that's the problem, she paused. I don't plan on ever hurting you, but if I do, I won't be sticking around for the pounding. I'll pull a runner so fast your head will spin. That's called self-preservation. Smart woman, the smartest, don't forget it. We married at a small ceremony in Santa Fe with our family and close friends. Deb wore a silver dress that matched her hair, and I wore a suit that Bobby picked out because she said my taste in formal wear was aggressively mediocre. Eleanor and Jack flew in from Arizona. Roman was the ring bearer again and performed his duties with the resigned professionalism of a 7-year-old who has done this before. Deb moved into our sprawling house without a single hesitation. Within a month, the garden was twice its original size, every closet had been reorganized, and there were purple throw pillows on furniture that had never seen a throw pillow in its life. Roman took to her immediately. He'd been calling me daddy since he first started talking, which never stopped making my chest expand, and he called both Bobby and Stephanie mommy, and they somehow always knew which one he meant. I could never hear a difference. They claimed it was obvious. He lifts the O slightly when he means me, Stephanie explained once. He absolutely does not, I said. He absolutely does, Bobby confirmed. You just don't have the ear for it. Deb became Auntie Deb to Roman at first, then just Deb. And eventually, about 6 months in, Grandma Deb, when Eleanor's first child arrived and Roman heard the baby's older cousins use the phrase. The name transferred from baby to boy without anyone planning it. Our house was full now. Genuinely, beautifully full. 5 adults, 1 child, 2 Labrador retrievers that Deb brought from her previous life, and a revolving door of visitors, friends, and family that kept the kitchen busy and the dishwasher running constantly. Eleanor and Jack lived about 45 minutes west of us and spent a lot of weekends at our place with their growing family. Jack had relaxed considerably since the chokehold incident and now treated me with the easy affection of a son-in-law who has made peace with his father-in-law's methods. He even started calling me Dad, which I pretended not to care about and secretly loved. I'd sit on the back porch some evenings after everyone had gone to bed, sipping whiskey in the quiet, and think about the man I was at 30, broken, betrayed, driving through the dark on I-65 with Pat Hughes calling a baseball game on the radio, believing that love was something that had been taken from me permanently. That man had no idea what was coming. He couldn't have imagined this house, these people, this life. He couldn't have imagined that the worst night of his existence, standing in Angel's kitchen with a stranger, eating tuna sandwiches over a crying toddler, would be the first night of everything that mattered. I wished I could go back and tell him, just keep going. It gets so much better. But he wouldn't have believed me anyway. 2-year-old Kayla Lassiter was running through our house at full speed with both Labradors chasing her. All 3 of them making sounds that weren't quite barking and weren't quite giggling, but existed somewhere in between. It was Christmas week, and our kitchen table held 6 adults who qualified as grandparents, a 7-year-old Roman who qualified as an uncle, and enough food to sustain a small army. Eleanor and Jack sat at the far end with their second child, a 3-month-old boy who was doing the only thing 3-month-olds do well, sleeping through chaos. Jack's parents, Marcia and Tom, had flown in from the East Coast for the holidays. We'd invited them because Marcia admitted she was jealous of how often we got to see Kayla, and because Deb hadn't seen Marcia, her best friend, in nearly a year. Tom came along with the cautious enthusiasm of a man who didn't quite know what he was walking into. I found out how cautious on the second evening. The women had gone to some holiday market downtown, taking Kayla and Roman with them. Jack was putting the baby down in the guest room. Tom and I were alone on the back porch with bourbon and the kind of silence that happens when two men don't know each other well enough to skip the small talk but are both bad at small talk. "I'm going to be honest with you," Tom said, staring at his glass. "I've never been around this kind of situation before. Marcia told me about your family and I thought I understood, but being here in the house is different from hearing about it." "You mean Bobby and Stephanie," I said. "I mean all of it, but yeah, mainly them. I've never had close personal contact with lesbians before. I always thought—" He stopped himself, shifted in his chair. "This is going to sound ignorant. Go ahead. I always thought lesbians were, masculine, tough-looking. They're both very—" He trailed off again, looking uncomfortable. "Attractive," I offered. "Yeah, very," I laughed, not at him, at the earnestness of his confusion. Tom was a good man operating on outdated software, and to his credit, he was trying to update. "They're just regular married people, Tom. That's really all you need to know. I'd trust either one of them with my wallet, my wife, my daughter, my granddaughter, and my life." He nodded slowly, processing. "Don't overthink it," I added. "They're still women. They've each got more shoes than you and me put together." That got a real laugh out of him, and the tension cracked like ice on a pond. The real breakthrough came through sports. Bobby was a die-hard Arsenal fan, had been since before I knew her. She watched every Premier League match she could find, shouted at the television in language that would make a sailor blush, and owned more Arsenal merchandise than any human being should. Tom, it turned out, was a Crystal Palace supporter. I didn't know this was significant until the first time Arsenal and Crystal Palace played each other during Tom and Marcia's visit. Bobby had the match on in the family room, and Tom wandered in with his coffee, saw the Crystal Palace crest on screen, and said completely innocently, "Oh, you follow the Premier League." What followed was 2 hours of the most creative profanity I have ever witnessed between two human beings. "That's offside. Are you blind?" Bobby screamed at the screen. "That was a clean tackle and you know it, you delusional woman," Tom screamed back. "Delusional? Your keeper couldn't stop a beach ball. Your striker couldn't score in an empty net." It escalated from there. At one point, Bobby called Tom something that I'm fairly certain is illegal to say on British television, and Tom responded with a phrase so creatively vulgar that Deb actually wrote it down because she wanted to remember it. Stephanie, Marcia, Deb, and I sat in the kitchen listening to this happen, exchanging glances that ranged from horrified to delighted. "Should we intervene?" Marcia asked. "Absolutely not," I said. "This is the most fun either of them has had in months." Jack and Eleanor, wisely, did not bring the grandchildren around when Arsenal played Crystal Palace after that. But here's the thing about shared passion, even when it's adversarial, it builds connection. By the end of the holiday visit, Tom and Bobby were texting each other match predictions, sharing stats, and arguing about transfers with the intensity of people who genuinely enjoyed the argument. Tom had stopped being uncomfortable around Bobby. He'd started being comfortable with her, which is a very different thing, and it happened because they found common ground on a football pitch, even if that ground was contested territory. Deb, who had been quietly working on Marcia for months over phone calls and texts, made her big pitch on the last night of the visit. "The house next door is going up for sale in the spring," she mentioned over dessert, casual as breathing. 3 bedrooms, nice yard, 10-second commute to your grandchildren." Marcia looked at Tom. Tom looked at Marcia. A conversation happened in that look that would have taken most couples an hour of words. "We'll think about it," Tom said. They bought the house 4 months later. And just like that, our family had expanded again. The betrayed man who'd driven away from Chicago alone in the dark now lived in a house full of love, Next door to more of it, with grandchildren running through both yards and two Labradors who didn't understand property lines. It was a beautiful Santa Fe evening. The kind where the sky goes from blue to gold to pink in stages, like God is showing off his palette, and the air smells like sage and warm earth and whatever Deb has growing in the garden this month. July, I think. The high desert in July is dry and warm and the light stays long, stretching the shadows of the juniper trees across the yard until they touch the back fence. I was sitting on the porch swing behind my house with a glass of Jameson Black Barrel Irish whiskey, rocking gently and doing what old men do on porches, thinking about how I got here. Through the screen door, I could hear the sounds of my family. Deb was in the kitchen arguing with Bobby about whether cilantro belongs in potato salad. Stephanie was refereeing, which meant she was agreeing with whoever had spoken most recently. Roman, who was home from college for the summer, was playing a video game in the family room with the volume too high. Jack and Elinor were in the living room with the kids. I could hear their youngest shrieking about something that was either hilarious or catastrophic. With a 4-year-old, those categories overlap. Tom and Marcia were at their place next door. Tom had texted me an hour ago, "Match tomorrow, your girl's going down." Meaning Bobby's Arsenal was playing his Crystal Palace. Meaning tomorrow's viewing would require earplugs and possibly a referee. 63 years old, and my life was so full it hummed. The screen door creaked open, and a skinny 9-year-old with dark red hair and bright blue eyes came out onto the porch. She was carrying a juice box in one hand and dragging a stuffed animal in the other. Too old for stuffed animals, really, but this one had been a gift from Bobby, so it had earned permanent status. Kayla Lassiter climbed onto the swing next to me and leaned her body against my side. She was long-limbed and freckled and looked so much like a woman she'd never met that sometimes it stopped me mid-breath. Angel's hair, Angel's eyes, Angel's chin. The genes had skipped a generation and landed on this child with the precision of a message from somewhere I couldn't see but could always feel. "Whatcha thinking about, Grando?" she asked. Grando, her name for me. She'd invented it when she was 4 and couldn't figure out if I was Grandpa or Grandpa Oliver, and somehow the sounds got mixed together into something that was entirely hers. I loved it unreasonably. "I was thinking about my life," I said. "About how lucky I've been." "How are you lucky?" she asked, stabbing her juice box straw through the hole with the aggressive precision of a child who has done this 1,000 times. I took a sip of whiskey and thought about how to answer that question for a 9-year-old. There was a version that involved hotel rooms in Chicago and women named Vivian and drives through the dark and tuna sandwiches in dead women's kitchens, and that version was true, but it wasn't right. Not for her. Not tonight. "Well, baby, you know when something bad happens, but everything turns out good anyway," I said. "That's kind of what happened for me." She squirmed next to me the way kids do when they're thinking hard. Her juice box crinkled. Her legs swung because they didn't quite reach the porch floor. I watched her face, and I saw the moment understanding arrived, a light behind the blue eyes, quick and certain. "Yeah," she said, nodding hard. "Like when I scraped my knee the other day and Grandma Deb gave me ice cream." I looked down at my granddaughter. She beamed up at me, knowing she'd found the right answer, and I felt something settle in my chest that had been restless for 30 years. "Something like that, baby," I said. "Something like that." She leaned harder against me and sipped her juice box, and we rocked on the swing together, watching the sky do its evening show over the desert. The sounds of the house drifted through the screen door, Deb's laugh, Bobby's voice rising about something, Roman's video game, a child's squeal, a dog barking once. The music of a full life. I thought about a Saturday afternoon a long time ago, sitting on a different sofa in a different state, watching a baseball man on television search for quality babies in the crowd at Wrigley Field. I thought about the blonde woman who brought me a beer that day and smiled at me with blue eyes that I would have done anything for. I thought about how she told me to leave it to her, and I did, and everything fell apart. And then everything came together. Not the way I planned, not even close. I planned for a house in Indiana, 2 kids with Vivian, a career at Bishop, a life that fit neatly into the boxes that nice Midwestern men are supposed to check. Instead, I got Santa Fe. A woman named Angel who died too young. A daughter who isn't mine by blood but is mine by every measure that matters. A son I helped create for two women who loved me enough to ask. A wife with purple hair who can't sit still. A platonic life partner who can knee a man into next week and cry over a tied shoe in the same afternoon. 6 grandparents for children who will grow up knowing that family isn't a shape, it's a verb. It's the thing you do, every day, you show up. No I in team, no I in us. Jim Deshayes would have been proud. Because when I looked at the red-haired girl beside me on that porch swing, Angel's granddaughter, rocking in the evening light with juice on her chin and a stuffed animal under her arm, I knew exactly what I was looking at. The most quality baby of them all.